When I signed the divorce papers, it felt like the final page of a book I had been trying to rewrite for years. My name is Rachel Thompson, and I had spent the last decade trying to make a family out of something that was never really whole. My marriage to Greg was never easy, but I stayed for his son, Tyler. Tyler came into my life when he was just 10 years old, shy, distant, but with eyes that carried the weight of more than any child should bear. His mother had passed away when he was 8, and when Greg and I married, I tried my best to fill that maternal gap in his life. He never called me Mom, but he always called me Rachel with a tone that felt respectful, even warm. When Greg and I split, it wasn't loud or violent, it was quiet, slow, and inevitable. He found someone else, and rather than fight for a love that had long slipped away, I let it go. I thought I would be alone for a while, and that maybe it was what I needed. I didn't expect the knock at my door one rainy Tuesday evening just 2 months after the divorce. Tyler, now 20, stood at the doorstep with a single duffel bag and a soaked hoodie. His eyes, still the same stormy shade of blue, didn't need to explain anything. I opened the door wider and let him in. "Where's your dad?" I asked once he had dried off a bit and was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I made for him. "He's in Arizona now," Tyler muttered. "Moved in with his new girlfriend." I didn't feel like tagging along. I didn't press for more. He was a grown man, legally speaking, but still figuring life out. I knew the kind of neglect Greg was capable of, especially when he was wrapped up in a new woman. I also knew that if Tyler had nowhere to go, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night knowing I turned him away. "You can stay here as long as you need," I told him. He looked up at me, a flicker of relief in his eyes. "Thanks, Rachel. I don't know what I'd do otherwise." The first few weeks passed smoothly. Tyler helped around the house, picked up part-time shifts at the local auto garage, and mostly kept to himself. I was adjusting to life post-divorce, working from home, and taking quiet evening walks to gather my thoughts. I appreciated the company, especially someone who understood my past without needing an explanation. One Saturday afternoon, I found him in the living room, flipping through an old family photo album. It was one of the few I had salvaged from the divorce, pictures of holidays, birthdays, and random silly moments that made up our patchwork family. "You kept all these?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, taking a seat beside him. "They're still part of my life, even if things didn't work out." He turned the page slowly, pausing on a photo of the three of us at a 4th of July picnic. I was in a red dress, Greg was holding the grill tongs like a sword, and Tyler was grinning at a sparkler in his hand. "I remember that day," he said quietly. "You made those strawberry shortcakes. I had like 4. I laughed. You were always so easy to feed." Tyler closed the album and looked at me. "You were the only one who ever tried to really know me, you know? Dad never really got me." I felt a pang in my chest, the kind you get when you realize someone's been hurting for far too long and you didn't even know how deep it ran. I reached out and touched his hand, briefly, not thinking much of it. It was a comforting gesture, one I had given him countless times before when he was younger. But this time, he held my hand in return. His eyes lingered on mine a second longer than I expected. It wasn't inappropriate, just intense, like he was searching for something in me he wasn't sure he had the right to find. I pulled away gently, suddenly aware of the silence between us. "Let's order pizza," I said quickly. "Yeah," he replied, but his eyes didn't leave mine for a moment longer. As the days passed, I tried to brush off the feeling that something was changing between us. He was still polite, respectful, and helpful. But the way he looked at me sometimes made my heart pound in a way it never had before, not with Greg, not with anyone. I told myself it was just gratitude, or misplaced affection due to our unusual family dynamic. Then one night, I heard a knock on my bedroom door. It was after midnight. I had been struggling to sleep, tossing and turning. When I opened the door, Tyler stood there in pajama pants and a t-shirt, looking uneasy. "I had a nightmare," he said, almost embarrassed. I blinked, unsure of what to say. "Do you want to talk about it?" He nodded, and I stepped aside, letting him sit on the edge of my bed. He told me it was about his mom, how she was trapped in a burning house and he couldn't save her. I sat beside him and listened as he poured out years of unresolved pain and guilt. He cried, quietly, and leaned his head on my shoulder. "You've always been there," he whispered. "Even when everything fell apart." I stroked his hair the way I used to when he was little. It was instinctual, maternal, but it felt like we were both fighting a different kind of emotion. I didn't know how long we sat like that, but when he finally stood up and left the room, my heart ached with a confusion I didn't want to name. From that night on, something unspoken lingered in the air between us. We were careful, never crossing any lines, but the emotional closeness felt overwhelming. He began doing more thoughtful things, cooking dinner, bringing me flowers from the garden, complimenting me in ways that sounded less like a son and more like a man admiring a woman. I knew I had to set boundaries, but I didn't know how to explain them without hurting him. I was lonely, vulnerable, and part of me enjoyed the attention. But I also knew it was dangerous. Everything came to a head one evening when I found a letter on my pillow. It was handwritten, neat, and unmistakably from Tyler. "Rachel," it began, "I don't know how to say this, and maybe I shouldn't. But I need to get it out. You've always been my safe place. Even when I was a kid, I saw you as someone I could trust, someone who made me feel whole. But these past weeks, something's shifted. I look at you now and I feel things I don't understand. I know it's wrong to feel this way. I just had to tell you." I sat on the bed, the letter in my hands, and tears welled in my eyes. I didn't know if I had led him on unintentionally or if he had simply misinterpreted kindness in a time of emotional chaos. Either way, I knew this couldn't go on. The next morning, I asked him to join me for coffee. I laid the letter on the table and looked him in the eye. "Tyler, I love you. I always have. But it's a different kind of love," I said gently. He nodded, his face pale. "I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "No," I interrupted. "I'm glad you were honest. But we need some space. You're still figuring out who you are, and I think it's best you find a place of your own." His eyes filled with tears. "So this is goodbye?" "No," I said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "It's just a reset. I'll always be here for you, but we need boundaries. For both of us." It shattered me to watch him pack his things again, to see the hurt in his face as he left. But I knew it was the right thing to do. Sometimes love isn't enough to make something right, it has to be matched with wisdom and restraint. Weeks passed. I focused on healing, on rebuilding my life with firmer foundations. Tyler called sometimes, just to check in, and I could tell he was finding his own path. I was proud of him for that.